Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at a fascinating document from 2001.
Oh, yeah. This one's really something.
It's called Future Strategic Issues, Future Warfare Circa 2025.
Catchy title.
I know, right? And get this, it was actually put together by NASA.
By NASA. What do they know about warfare?
Well, the author, Dennis Bushnell, was the chief scientist at NASA Langley Research Center.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
But it's not about spaceships or anything like that.
So what is it about?
It's about how emerging technologies back in 2001 could potentially reshape warfare by the year 2025.
So basically predicting the future of warfare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is that he's looking at real-world trends, not just sci-fi fantasies.
Right, things that were already in development back then.
Right, like the internet, biotechnology, nanotechnology, all that stuff. He called it a triple technological revolution.
A triple revolution.
Yeah, and what struck me is how he emphasizes that these technologies aren't evolving in isolation. They're influencing each other and accelerating each other's development.
So it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly. And the pace of change he's talking about is exponential advancements that used to take decades are now happening in months.
That's mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And he also points out that a lot of this research is happening outside the U.S., particularly in Europe and Japan.
So it's a truly global phenomenon.
Exactly. And that has huge implications for global security. So let's break down how each of these revolutions could impact the future of warfare, starting with the IT revolution.
All right, let's do it.
Bushnell talks about this concept of tele-everything, telecommuting, telemedicine, teleshopping, you name it.
Basically everything going remote.
Exactly. And he even predicted that quantum computing could become available within 5 years of him writing the document.
Wow, so around 2006.
Yeah. Now, we haven't quite reached the level of quantum computing he envisioned, but the progress in processing power and data analysis has been insane.
It's truly remarkable what we can do with computers these days.
Right. Think about the implications for military intelligence, battlefield management, and even the development of autonomous weapons systems.
It's both exciting and a little scary at the same time.
No kidding. And speaking of scary, he also mentions this U.S. government initiative called the Human Brain Project, which aimed to digitally map the entire human brain.
Whoa, hold on. Trying to map the human brain? That's pretty ambitious.
It is. But imagine if they succeeded. The implications for artificial intelligence would be huge.
No doubt. Machines that can think like humans?
Yeah.
That's the stuff of science fiction.
It is. But Bushnell takes it even further. He introduces this concept called the imagination engine.
The imagination engine. What's that?
It's essentially a neural network that generates new ideas by being starved of meaningful input.
So they're basically forcing it to dream up new concepts.
Exactly. It's like they're trying to tap into the creative potential of AI.
That's wild. What could that mean for warfare? New tactics?
Yeah.
New weapon systems we haven't even thought of?
It's a possibility, and it's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so let's move on to the biorevolution.
Right. Hit me with it.
Bushnell talks about both the potential benefits and the dangers of this field.
Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. On the one hand, he talks about farm animals, animals genetically engineered to produce drugs. He even mentions spider silk-producing goats for biosteel armor.
Goats making armor. That's crazy.
I know, right? It sounds like science fiction, but the research was already underway back then.
So this wasn't just pie-in-the-sky thinking.
No, he was looking at real trends.
Yeah.
And imagine the implications for warfare.
Yeah, like what?
Imagine being able to create food medicine or even advanced materials right on the battlefield using bioengineered organisms.
That would revolutionize military logistics.
Absolutely. But then there's the dark side of the biorevolution, bioweapons.
Uh-oh.
Bushnell talks about binary bioweaponry, where two harmless components are combined to create a deadly pathogen. He even uses the example of VEE, a biocaumative that was weaponized to illustrate the potential dangers.
Yikes, that's scary stuff.
It is. And what's even more concerning is the potential for genomically targeted pathogens, viruses that only affect people with a specific genetic makeup.
So you could target specific groups or even individuals.
Exactly. It's a terrifying prospect that raises some serious ethical and security concerns.
No doubt about it.
Okay, enough bio-nightmares for one day. Let's move on to nanotechnology.
All right, let's nano it up.
This is all about manipulating materials at the atomic level, and Bushnell highlights these things called carbon nanotubes.
Carbon nanotubes, I've heard of those. They're supposed to be incredibly strong, right?
Incredibly, like 600 times stronger than steel, and incredibly lightweight.
Wow. Imagine the implications for military equipment.
Exactly. You could have incredibly durable armor, lightweight vehicles, and even entirely new types of weapons systems.
It would be a game changer for sure.
And then he goes on to describe this thing called free-form fabrication, basically 3D printing at the molecular level.
Hold on, 3D printing with atoms.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Instead of building things with traditional manufacturing techniques, you're creating objects atom by atom.
That's insane. What would that mean for military production?
Well, for one thing, it could dramatically speed up the process of prototyping and deploying new weapons and equipment.
So instead of waiting months or years for a new tank, you could potentially print one on demand.
Exactly. And then there's this wild idea he throws in, an aluminum vortex combustor that can burn seawater.
Burn seawater. How is that even possible?
The science is pretty complex, but basically it's a way of extracting energy from seawater.
And what would you use that energy for?
Propulsion. Underwater propulsion. Imagine submarines and underwater drones with incredible speed and range operating silently and with minimal fuel requirements.
That would revolutionize naval warfare.
It would. And it shows how Bushnell is connecting these emerging technologies to potential military applications.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how it can be used.
Exactly. So how does he envision all this playing out on the battlefield?
Good question.
Well, he talks about a shift from traditional high explosives to something he calls volumetric weaponry.
Volumetric weaponry. What's that?
It's a bit of a head scratcher. Instead of relying solely on physical destruction, he's talking about a broader range of effects.
Give me some examples.
Okay, so think about EMP blasts that disable electronics information warfare, that disrupts communications, or even microdust weapons that incapacitate personnel.
So it's about controlling the battlefield in a more subtle and maybe even more devastating way.
Exactly. It's a shift from brute force to a more targeted and sophisticated approach.
And with this new approach, you need much more sophisticated intelligence gathering.
Right. And that's where sensor swarms come in.
Sensor swarms.
Yeah, basically networks of tiny sensors like smart dust or nanotags spread across the battlefield.
So you'd have constant surveillance everywhere.
Pretty much. They could be deployed from the air by ground troops or even hidden in everyday objects.
That would make it incredibly difficult for enemy forces to operate undetected.
It would. And he even talks about co-opting insects as part of these sensor networks.
Co-opted insects. What does that even mean?
Using nanotechnology to implant sensors or control mechanisms into insects to gather intelligence.
So basically turning bugs into spies.
Pretty much. It sounds crazy, but the research was already underway back then.
Wow. The future of espionage is going to be weird.
It is.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a battlefield that's constantly being monitored and analyzed with vast amounts of data feeding into AI systems that can identify threats and even recommend courses of action.
It sounds like a giant high-tech game of chess.
It does. And with all this reliance on information and technology comes a whole new set of vulnerabilities.
Oh, I bet.
Bushnell argues that even technologically superior forces like the U.S. military could be incredibly vulnerable in this new environment.
How so?
He talks about anti-access strategies designed to keep U.S. forces at bay.
Like what?
Everything from swarms of inexpensive drones to sophisticated electronic warfare that jams communications and disables weapons systems.
So basically making it very difficult for the U.S. to project power.
Exactly. And with these attacks potentially coming from anywhere in the world, it becomes incredibly difficult to pinpoint the source or retaliate effectively.
That's a game changer for sure.
It is. And Bushnell doesn't stop there. He goes on to outline some pretty chilling attack scenarios that exploit these vulnerabilities.
Oh no, what kind of scenarios are we talking about?
Well, for starters, he talks about using transoceanic UAVs, basically long-range drones, to target critical infrastructure within the U.S.
So attacking power grids, communications networks, military bases from halfway across the world.
Exactly. It highlights the vulnerability of large centralized infrastructure in this new era of warfare.
And who would be launching these attacks?
That's the scary part. It could be nation states, but it can also be smaller groups or even individuals with access to advanced technology.
So the traditional lines between state and non-state actors are blurring.
Exactly. And it makes defending against these threats incredibly difficult.
So what else does he talk about?
Well, he also mentions this really terrifying idea: detonating offshore methane hydrate deposits to create devastating tsunamis.
Hold on. Are you serious? Tsunamis as weapons?
It sounds crazy, but the science is there. Methane hydrates are these ice-like deposits of methane found on the ocean floor.
And detonating them would release a huge amount of energy.
Exactly. Enough to create massive tsunamis that could inundate coastal cities.
That's a truly terrifying thought.
It is. And it highlights the potential for exploiting natural phenomena as weapons.
We need to talk about something less scary now.
Yeah, okay, but just one more scary thing, I promise.
Right, shoot.
He also talks about the potential for cyber warfare and information warfare to target critical systems like banking and transportation networks.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty scary too.
Imagine hackers crippling entire economies by disrupting financial transactions or shutting down power grids.
The chaos would be
It
unbelievable.
would, and it shows how the battle space is expanding beyond physical territory to encompass the digital realm.
So the front lines are everywhere now.
Exactly. And then there's this concept he calls CNN syndrome.
CNN syndrome, what's that?
It's the idea that as warfare becomes more technologically advanced and less reliant on traditional combat, public opinion will be shaped largely by what people see on television and the internet.
Ah, so the media will play an even bigger role
Mm.
in shaping the narrative of war.
Exactly. And that raises all sorts of questions about the potential for manipulation and propaganda.
No doubt. So it's not just about winning the physical battle, it's about winning the information war as well.
Exactly. And that's a whole new dimension of warfare that we need to understand.
So where do we go from here? Is there any hope of defending against these threats?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned.
It's a lot to take in, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that the future of warfare is going to be a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. The old rules don't apply anymore.
So how do we even begin to adapt? Where do we start? Bushnell actually lays out a bunch of recommendations.
Okay, so he doesn't just leave us hanging with all these scary scenarios.
No, he actually offers some practical advice.
Let's hear it.
One of the first things he talks about is this idea of a layered defense approach.
Leader defense, what does that mean?
It means that we can't just focus on building up our military forces. We need to think about strengthening our resilience in all areas. Cybersecurity infrastructure protection, public health preparedness, you name it.
So it's a more holistic approach?
Exactly. It's not just about being strong militarily. It's about being a strong society overall, one that can withstand all sorts of shocks and disruptions.
That makes sense. But it also sounds really complicated.
It is. It requires a whole of government approach,
Yeah.
not just the military. We need to be thinking about protecting our power grids from cyber attacks, having plans in place to respond to bioterrorism, even educating the public about these new dangers.
So preparedness isn't just for doomsday preppers anymore.
Exactly. It's for everyone. And Bushnell doesn't shy away from the fact that this is going to be expensive and complex.
But he's saying it's necessary.
He argues that the alternative, being caught unprepared, is far more dangerous and costly in the long run.
It's a sobering thought for sure.
It is. But amidst all this talk of threats and vulnerabilities, I'm curious, does Bushnell offer any hope? Are there any potential upsides to these technological advancements?
He does. He's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good. So what does he say?
Well, he points out that technologies like nanotechnology and biotechnology could also be used to solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
Like what?
Poverty, hunger, disease, you name it. Imagine if we could harness these advancements to improve lives rather than destroy them.
It's a nice thought that technology can be a force for good.
Yeah, it all depends on how we use it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like fire. It can be used to cook food or burn down a house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to make sure we're using these powerful tools responsibly.
All right. So back to the threats for a moment. Bushnell lays out a few specific attack scenarios that are especially concerning. One that really stood out to me was the vulnerability of our critical infrastructure to cyber attacks.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before.
Right. But he really paints a grim picture of what could happen if a hostile actor gains control of our power grids, communication networks, or financial systems.
I can imagine. It would be chaos.
It would be more than just chaos. We're talking about the potential to cripple entire economies. So widespread panic, undermine public trust in institutions.
And these attacks could come from anywhere.
Exactly. With very little warning. It's like a digital Trojan horse.
You think you're letting in something harmless, but it turns out to be a weapon.
Right. And the more interconnected our world becomes, the more vulnerable we are.
So what can we do about it?
Well, Bushnell isn't just sounding the alarm. He also offers some concrete suggestions.
Like what?
He emphasizes the importance of a multi-layered approach to cybersecurity.
Okay, what does that involve?
First, we need to invest heavily in cybersecurity technology and expertise. Better firewalls, stronger encryption, a whole new generation of cyber warriors.
So we need a digital equivalent of the military.
Pretty much. But technology alone isn't enough. Bushnell also talks about the importance of deterrence.
Deterrence, that's a classic military concept.
It is. But how do you deter a cyber attack?
Yeah, it's not like you can send a fleet of warships to intimidate a hacker.
Right. but you can make it clear that any cyber attack will be met with a swift and decisive response.
So basically, you need to establish a credible threat of retaliation.
Exactly. You need to establish a clear red line in cyberspace and be willing to back it up with action.
Of course, that raises all sorts of questions about attribution and escalation.
It does. But the fundamental principle remains the same. Make the cost of attack greater than the potential benefit.
Okay, so deterrence is part of the equation.
Yeah,
But what about mitigating the damage if an attack does occur,
that's a good point. No system is foolproof.
right? So what do we do?
Well, Bushnell emphasizes the need for resilience. We need to have backup systems in place, robust disaster recovery plans, and the ability to respond quickly and effectively to minimize the impact of an attack.
So it's not just about preventing attacks. It's about being able to bounce back quickly.
Exactly. Think of it as a digital immune system.
I like that analogy.
So we've talked about cyber warfare, but what about biowarfare?
Ah, yes. The other big scary one.
Bushnell seems particularly concerned about the potential for genetically engineered pathogens.
And rightfully so. We talked about how terrifying that could be.
It's like something out of a science fiction horror movie.
But it's a real threat.
So how do we protect ourselves from something like that?
Well, Bushnell advocates for a multi-layered approach here as well.
Okay, tell me more.
He stresses the importance of a strong public health infrastructure.
So it's not just about the military.
Right. We need robust surveillance systems to detect outbreaks early.
So we can contain them before they spread?
Exactly. And we need the capacity to rapidly develop and deploy vaccines and treatments.
So it's about being prepared for the worst case scenario.
Exactly. And just like with cyber warfare, we need to invest in research and development to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's a constant arms race.
In a sense, yes. And it's an arms race that requires a global effort. We need international cooperation on biosecurity information sharing and the development of norms and treaties to prevent the misuse of these powerful technologies.
So it's not just about us protecting ourselves. It's about working with other countries to address this threat.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Okay. So we've talked about defense, but what about offense? What does Bushnell propose as a more proactive strategy?
Well, he's a big proponent of robotics and autonomous systems.
Robots on the battlefield.
Exactly. He sees them as a way to reduce casualties, enhance efficiency, and expand military capabilities.
But they also raise a lot of ethical questions, right?
They do. What happens when machines are making life or death decisions?
It's a tough question. And Bushnell acknowledges that the development and deployment of autonomous weapon systems must be carefully considered.
So it's not just about the technology. It's about the ethical implications as well.
Right. And that conversation needs to involve not just military experts, but also ethicists, philosophers, and the public at large.
We need to have a serious discussion about these issues before it's too late.
Okay, so robots are part of the equation. But Bushnell also argues that these technological advancements could lead to a fundamental shift in the very nature of power.
Interesting. What does he mean by that?
He's suggesting that traditional notions of power, military, might, economic strength, territorial control, might no longer be sufficient in a world where individuals and small groups can wield such incredible destructive power.
So the playing field is being leveled in a sense.
Potentially. And that means we might need to rethink the very foundations of our political and social structures.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is, but I think it's worth considering.
Agreed. So it's not just about adapting our military, it's about adapting our entire society.
Exactly. It's a whole new world out there.
Okay. So let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. What are some of the more practical recommendations that Bushnell makes?
Well, he talks a lot about this idea of developing asymmetric capabilities.
Asymmetric capabilities. What's that?
It's essentially a recognition that we can't win the future by playing by the old rules.
Meaning?
Instead of trying to match our adversaries tank for tank or plane for plane, we need to find ways to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, and out-innovate them.
So be more agile and adaptable.
Exactly. And that means investing in areas where we have a clear technological edge, like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and directed energy weapons.
So focusing on our strength.
Right. He also stresses the importance of strengthening our alliances and partnerships.
Why is that so important?
Because in a world where threats are increasingly complex and transnational, we can't go it alone.
Makes sense. We need to work together.
Exactly. We need to be sharing intelligence, coordinating our efforts, and presenting a united front.
And who should we be partnering with?
Well, obviously other governments, but Bushnell also emphasizes the need to engage with the private sector.
Oh, that's interesting. Why the private sector?
Because so many of the most important technological advancements are happening outside of the traditional defense industry.
True. Think about all the innovation happening in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. We need to be working with tech companies, research institutions, and universities to harness that power of innovation.
So it's a whole of society approach to national security.
Exactly. It's not just about the military anymore. It's about everyone playing a role in protecting our future.
I like that idea. A collective effort.
It's a challenging vision, but also an incredibly exciting one. We're not just talking about winning wars, we're talking about building a more resilient, adaptable, and ultimately a more peaceful world.
It's a worthy goal for sure.
But it's clear that we've got a lot of work to do to get there.
So much to think about, right?
I know. It's like this document is a window into the future, but it's not just about warfare.
It's about humanity as a whole.
Yeah, it really makes you question everything.
It connects all these different threads, technology, globalization, power. It's all intertwined.
And it's changing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
It is, but we have to try. We can't just bury our heads in the sand.
So what do we do? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to foster dialogue, to talk about these issues openly and honestly.
Like we're doing now.
Exactly. We need to raise awareness, educate ourselves and each other.
Because knowledge is power, right?
It is. And it's also the key to making informed decisions.
So what kind of decisions are we talking about?
Well, for starters, we need to decide what kind of future we want to create. Do we want a future where technology is used for good or for evil?
It's a pretty stark choice.
It is. But it's a choice we have to make. And it's not just up to governments or militaries. It's up to all of us.
So what can we as individuals do?
Well, for one thing, we can educate ourselves. We can read books, articles, reports like the one we've been discussing.
Stay informed.
Exactly. We can also engage in constructive dialogue with our friends, family, colleagues, elected officials.
Get involved in the conversation.
Right. And we can support organizations that are working to promote peace and security.
So there's actually a lot we can do even as individuals.
There is. We may not have all the answers, but we can start by asking the right questions.
Questions like?
Well, for example, how can we ensure that technology is used for the benefit of humanity and not for its destruction?
That's a big one.
It is, but it's a question we have to grapple with.
And there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to find one.
So this is a call to action then?
It is. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
We need to shape the future, not let it shape us.
Exactly. And I believe we have the power to do that.
I hope you're right.
Me too. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, effort, and a lot of collaboration.
But it's worth it, right?
Absolutely. The stakes are too high to do nothing.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the future of warfare, what are your final thoughts?
I think the future is uncertain, but it's also full of possibility. The choices we make today will determine what kind of world we create for ourselves and for future generations.
So let's choose wisely.
Let's choose hope over fear. Let's choose cooperation over conflict. And let's choose to build a future where technology is used to empower, not destroy.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the future of warfare.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, the future is not set in stone. It's up to us to create it.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.